Today's episode of the More You Know podcast is brought to you by CrowdQuestion, a brand new social communication platform focused on connecting crowds to bring everyone closer to their community, as well as enhancing any occasion. Rather than being a social media platform focused on content and advertising, they're focused on communication and connection. Learn more about the platform and download the app free at crowdquestion.com. Today's episode of the More You Know podcast features Apple Crider, who's the host of the Top 100 podcast Young Smart Money, and also Travis Huff, who's a social media consultant and host of the Be Real Show, as well as Nichole Kane, who's a business consultant and host of the Unashamed Faith Podcast. And lastly, Max McCoy, who's a freelance filmmaker and host of the Looking Up Podcast. I asked each of them what inspired them to start their podcast. Enjoy the episode.
I'm just trying to make it all make sense.
The
More
You
No
Podcast.
Now, actually, funny story. About 4 days before I started my podcast, I did not even know what a podcast was. Now, what happened in those 4 days was basically I got invited to come on the radio. So I go to school here in Wisconsin. I'm actually graduating in like 3 weeks, burning through my whole program in about 2.5 years. So that's pretty nice. I kind of realized I didn't want to spend any more time at school than I had to, just because I have plenty of stuff to work on outside of school. So basically, I got invited to speak on my local radio station a little over 2 years ago. They wanted to have me in to talk about some of those businesses that I was working on, growing Instagram pages, social media marketing. I was running a couple businesses, making some money as a college student. They thought it would be pretty cool to have me talk on the radio. I was like, sure, why not? I've never been on the radio before, never done an interview before, but I mean, I'll try it out. I'm somebody who will try anything once. So I show up at the radio, I do this interview. It goes really, really well. I am having so much fun and I really enjoy it. And I'm walking out of the booth and I'm like, dang, that was so fun. Like, how can I do more of that? So I basically just Googled like how to interview people. And I sort of stumbled upon podcasting and I was like, oh yeah, that's literally exactly what I'm looking for. I'm so glad it already exists. So I basically just from there figured out how to start a podcast, watch some YouTube videos. And yeah, within like 4 or 5 days, I'd released my first episode. And it was not anything to brag about. I leave up my first few episodes just because it really shows how far I've come since I was getting started. So that was sort of how I got into podcasting. It was pretty random, honestly. Just going on the radio, getting interviewed, and then from there I was like, I'm gonna do more of this, and then so basically got started, and then from there I was just hooked.
So when I started my podcast, this is now coming up on our 5th year. I think it's 6 seasons now we're coming into. It's a great question. What inspired me? I started seeing like that people were doing podcasts, and I started seeing that you could interview people that might have more accolades, more, a mentor or someone like that you looked at as an idol or someone that you were inspired by. And I started saying, I want to get these people on these guests on my show. I want to get these people on my show. And the show kind of changed. It was called the Be Real Show from the beginning. And I didn't have a complete format. But I was really focused mostly on social media marketers, as that's my business. So I was bringing on the top level social media marketers, that you hear about and talk about and are out there. They're still out there, and so I still love that vertical, but my show has actually expanded into entrepreneurship. A lot more entrepreneurs, a lot of different verticals, a lot of different top level business owners are coming on the show because the focus is entrepreneurship, about the journey, about the struggle, how they've grown, how they've scaled. And then social is a part of it, and so it's very interesting. Sometimes your podcasts, the original goal, it expands and it becomes bigger than you realize. And my goal is obviously to get some of these people, my heroes, Drew Brees, Joe Montana, Phil Knight, Brett Favre, some of my heroes right there, on the podcast, and still give a shot. I'm still kind of going after guests and trying to get new guests on. And we have a lot of people booking shows, people booking their guests on our show, which is very fun too, because a lot of interesting people will come across your path that way. But the most important thing about starting a podcast is going back to our last one is not giving up when you have a show that doesn't do well and saying, oh shit, well, a show 3 years from now is going to do way better. Having that insight that if you keep pushing, it will get better. And that's really, really important. As as that probably is the biggest game changer in my life. You know,
I love this. I am sure there are so many of you out there that are sitting in there and you're twiddling your thumbs, wondering if you should start it, wondering if you have anything valuable to say, wondering if it's worth your time, or even if you know how. I highly suggest doing it. Starting my podcast was the best decision that I made, and it was inspired by all of the things that have gone on in my past. So my podcast is the journey of me finding my way to Christ, finding my way to freedom, and having unashamed faith. I mean, it's literally in the title. But what was happening is I got so irritated and felt so alone for so many years, going through depression, going through anxiety, going through self-mutilation, going through drinking problems, thinking, well, all these successful people, all these adults, no one talks about it. No one has a raw, honest conversation of saying, this is what I walked through. This is how I healed from it. And now here is victory. I just saw people talking about victory, and I never really knew if there was a journey that went with it, if there was a trauma, if there was an experience that went with it, right? So I felt so alone. I felt like I couldn't talk to people. I felt like I couldn't have that conversation with others because I was so embarrassed and shameful. And so for so many years, kept complaining about it. And God started chirping in my ear, and he said, Nick, you're the one that has to do it then. You've got to get the balls. You got to get the gusto to put it out there. So that's what I did. We went ahead and just started recording, and it came to fruition. And so now it truly is every single week a story of what I've overcome, but it's also actionable items on how you can overcome that too, how you can find your way to freedom, how you've got a community, how you have different things. So it's absolutely, absolutely amazing.
Starting a podcast was very much based off of just trying to grow personally. I had the intuition that for me to get to the next step of my progression, it would take me doing some hard things, and podcasting was right on the top of that list. I have always loved learning from books and from other people. I like to study people that I want to be more like, and podcasting allowed me to reach out to those people and to ask them questions directly. And I knew that would help me grow because of the things I was able to ask people within the realm of mind, body, spirit. But also, I wanted to start a podcast to get over that fear of doing just that, just reaching out to people and asking them for advice, asking them for their insight. And the whole process of holding a conversation with someone that you respect, for me, I saw that as a huge growing opportunity, and it has definitely been that. And so that's what inspired it, was how can I learn more? How can I learn from the people I respect? And how can I become the person that goes up to people and asks them for answers, rather than kind of hides behind the scenes all the time? And that was me facing my fears. And that's why I decided to start a podcast.
I'm just trying to make it all make sense.
A
More
You
No
Podcast.